Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about having a baby in midlife. Whether your pregnancy is planned or unexpected, giving birth and mothering a newborn is different as we get older. Our guest is Meg Tietz from the wonderful podcast Sorta Awesome. Meg is going to share her experiences adding a surprise fifth child to their family after age 40. Let's get started. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, Mindy.
Hey, Marie.
So here's a question, you guys. Have you ever had one of those dreams where you think you're pregnant and you wake up and you're like, oh my goodness, like that wasn't even possible, but it felt so real?
Yes. I have named them.
You have? What kind of names?
Oh, yeah. I had twins. I had Isabella and Anna something. It's been about 10 years.
But Mindy, that's only happened to you 10 years ago? Because I feel like that's happened to me even in the past year. Even though that is not going to be happening in my life, it still happens. Now, Julie, you're older than any of us here. Does it ever still happen to you?
Thanks, Marie. Not anymore. But I do remember having those, but not anymore, now that it's such a remote possibility.
Okay. Well, I have always been curious about women who have babies later in life unexpectedly, because that has happened to a few of my friends. And I know, like, even when they tell me, like, we're all surprised, they're surprised, and
Right.
it really can throw your life for a loop. And so becoming a new mom is a lot different in our 20s than it is in our late 30s or even our 40s. And so we thought that would be a great topic to talk about on Midlife Matters, because it is a topic that could keep you up in the middle of the night.
Literally.
Yes. And today we're joined by someone who has experienced the gamut in child rearing, including a newborn at age 41. Meg Tietz of the wonderful podcast Sorta Awesome is here to give us the scoop on having a baby in midlife. Meg, welcome to Midlife Matters.
Hi, you guys. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome, and we're just thrilled to have you. Meg, can you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, my name is Meg, and I live in Oklahoma City with my husband, who was my college sweetheart. This month, we are celebrating 22 years of marriage.
Oh, that's awesome.
We got married when we were children, basically. So yeah, we live in Oklahoma City. We're both from Oklahoma. We have 5 kids. Our oldest, Daisy, is 15. Then we have a 12-year-old daughter, AJ, who's 12. And then we have a set of twins, boy twins, who are 7 years old, Mac and John Kyle, and a baby who, you know what, he turns 1 this month. So do I have to start calling him a toddler now? Nico is our almost 1-year-old.
That's so awesome. Yes. And that is who we really want to talk about today, Meg, is your surprise Nico. But Meg, tell listeners what you do.
Sure, yes. So I'm the creator and host of Sorta Awesome, which is a weekly podcast for women. It's a lifestyle podcast. We launched this show back in 2015. So we have been creating this show weekly for women for 5 years now. We have, in that time, we've gathered an amazing community of women. We call ourselves the Awesomes. And every week we really just try to explore what is awesome in everyday life. So sometimes we will tackle big, important topics that are relevant to our times. And sometimes we just basically are sharing our confessions, the things that we honestly probably wouldn't even tell our best friends, but somehow we can get on a microphone and tell, thousands of people.
Right.
So that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. Prior to that, I did blogging and writing a million years ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. I co-authored a book about the first year of life. My co-author and I wrote a book called Spirit-Led Parenting, From Fear to Freedom in Baby's First Year. And so, yeah, I've been talking about this parenting thing for a while now.
That is awesome. And listeners, I just have to say, I am a huge fan of Sorta Awesome, and I listen every week. And I must confess, Meg, that when I saw the title of your episode called How I Told My Sister I'm Pregnant, I never thought you would be talking about yourself because, like you said, your youngest, your twins, were already 6. And I just naturally assumed that your sister was going to tell you that she was pregnant.
Yes.
So can you tell our listeners how you found out you were adding a 5th child to your family?
Well, Nico came into the world by storm. He's the most dramatic pregnancy reveal yet, and I've had surprise twins, so that's really amazing. But it was in the fall of I guess it would have been 2018, and I had just not been feeling well. I thought that I was, I didn't know that I was like sick, but I thought I was just having some really bad anxiety. And one night I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart was racing. I was like looking up the symptoms for female 40s heart attack. I thought I was having some kind of serious medical crisis. Well, the next day, I was going up the stairs in our house and I actually passed out at the top of the stairs. Oh, and my husband was like, "We're going to the emergency room right now." So
yes.
we get to the emergency room. They start running all kinds of tests, including doing a blood test. And so they're doing all of these tests, and they come back and they're like, we got to draw blood again. We're going to run your blood tests again just to check everything. And so I don't think much about it. I mean, I'm laughing now as I'm telling it, but at the time, I mean, I was quite sick. I've never passed out in my life before. Yeah. And I was really worried. My husband was really worried. And long story short, the doctor comes in. He's like, first of all, you have bronchitis, which I did not even know. You think of bronchitis as having this really hacking cough, and I'd had a little bit of a cough, but anyway, he was like, but secondly, you're pregnant. And, we're just like, what? And my husband was like, I knew it. I just knew it. Uh-huh. So that was the world's most expensive pregnancy test ever. I do not recommend it.
Yes, that must have just been like the shock of your lives to go from kind of fearing for your health, like what serious thing are they going to tell me, to, wow, here's this big news that you weren't even expecting. Like, if I go back and listen to that episode, you say that you hadn't even missed a cycle yet. Like, you had no idea.
No idea. In fact, I was supposed to start my period like a couple of days after this, when I ended up in the ER. So yeah, it was not even on my radar. I didn't feel pregnant. I mean, I felt like a lot of other things were going on, but it wasn't that classic. Like, well, when I was pregnant with the twins, I knew I was pregnant before I even had a positive pregnancy test, because all of a sudden I could not stand the smell or taste of coffee. And I love coffee. So
yeah, that was your key sign.
That was my big sign. Like, wait a second. Now, I of course didn't know I was having twins at the time, but there was nothing unusual. I didn't even think I was having a particularly bad round of PMS or anything. Right. So I could not have been more surprised in that moment.
Well, and it was probably different processing that with your husband. Like, even if you had suspected, you would have had a little bit of time to think about it before you told him,
right.
But this way it was just all out there at once.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I know from listening to you, you had lots of questions about how this particular news would affect your life and your family. We're interested to hear how this past year has gone, but let's start with the pregnancy itself. How did it differ from that of your older children? And then we're also curious, how did you feel later versus earlier in life?
It's so funny for anybody who's listening, or for any of you all who have had babies after the age of 35, when you get into advanced maternal age territory, your caregivers automatically just presume that, this is okay, like we're in high risk category now. Right. Everything's going to be different. I have to say that for me physically, and I think it has to do with the fact that Nico followed a set of twins, the pregnancy was really pretty easy. In fact, one of my friends who has children kind of the same as me, she had 2 older children, and then she had twins, and then she had a baby. They're younger than our kids. But when she found out I was having a baby after the twins, she messaged me and she was like, "This is going to be so easy. You can't even believe it."
Good. Because at 41, I'm sure you're looking for something easy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. One complication that was different is I did have gestational diabetes with Nico that I'd never had before, not even with the twins. So, that again amped up the sort of high risk feel of the pregnancy. But all in all, it was not this big ordeal. My body, I would get tired a little bit more easily, but honestly, with all these kids and being in your 40s and all the things that we do, I think most of us are tired most of the time anyway. It wasn't anything to where I felt like that I had to put my life on hold for sure.
Right. I loved listening to this particular podcast that Marie referenced earlier, because when I was listening to you describe this part of it, you just had this serene peace, this overwhelming, that's how I would describe it. And just this acceptance of, yourself at that age, how the pregnancy, whatever the Lord would have for you, you were just accepting.
Absolutely. And, that is a key component to this. People listening may be wondering, how you're in your 40s, how did you not know this was going to happen? This is like your first go round. But, a key part of the story is that before we got pregnant with Nico, we had converted to the Catholic Church. And so we had changed our practices and perception around pregnancy. Catholics practice what's called openness to life. Things that we had used to avoid pregnancy earlier in our marriage, we weren't using anymore. So, every month there was sort of that. And I've been practicing natural family planning since my oldest, Daisy, was born. So I'm not new to that. And since I did get pregnant, we did have a very true sense of peace of like, this was meant to be. There's no other explanation for it. I've been practicing charting, doing all of these things. I did notice my chart was a little wacky that month, but I was like, you know what? Honestly, what was on my mind is I'm probably headed into menopause. I'm in my 40s. My mom went into menopause in her 40s. And so when I have a weird chart, I'm thinking, okay, this means I'm getting ready for the big change of life. I did not know how big. Headed our way. But so because this was not new to us to practice natural family planning, and we got pregnant anyway, it did help me to have that sense of peace of like, genuinely, we do believe this was meant to be. So.
Right. And you hadn't done anything permanent, so you were open to, you still hadn't like closed that door firmly.
Right, exactly. But neither of us, even for years leading up to when converting to Catholicism, was not even on our radar. Neither Kyle, my husband, nor I had any peace about doing anything permanent. And again, it wasn't on our radar that was a sort of religious decision. We just didn't have peace about it for our own bodies. And so we just never did anything. And so, it's funny how these things kind of fall into place as you go along on your journey. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Meg, it's good to hear your pregnancy was easy and went so well. But let's talk about dealing with the needs of a newborn later in life. Did you notice a difference there? Like, sleep deprivation, was that worse with a newborn, or had you just kind of gotten used to that having 4 other kids?
I will say that I think it wasn't worse for me. I genuinely, looking back at all of the times we've had newborns in this family, I think that first baby to me was the hardest. Like,
yes.
you just cannot, when your friends try to tell you, oh, you're never going to sleep again, you cannot comprehend how that feels physically to have your sleep so interrupted. And my oldest was not a good sleeper at all. She didn't sleep all the way through the night until she was probably 15 months old. And even after that, we didn't have a lot of sleep with my oldest. And so I feel like she really broke me in for that. And then I just think, even here's the thing that we forget too, or I didn't even realize. Big kids get up at night too. One of my twins, when he was 5, went through a long stretch. I don't know how long it was. It felt like months. Maybe it was a few weeks. I can't remember. Where almost every night he would wake up in the middle of the night, come and get me and want me to tuck him back into bed, just like clockwork. He would come and get me. So, kids whether they're newborns or probably if they're 18 years old or even older, they are going to interrupt your sleep. So I have to say that even in my 40s, it didn't feel worse. I was kind of used to it. I was like, this is just how it feels when you are not sleeping well. So,
Yeah. So experience prepared you, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Was anything else about recovery harder? Like, did you feel like you just didn't bounce back as quickly energy-wise, or maybe you had aches and pains that you hadn't experienced before?
That is the only thing that was remarkably different from any of my other births. So all of my children are cesarean births. My oldest was an emergency C-section, and then after that, they've all been planned. And even though Nico's birth was the actual birth itself, I would say was the best one because number one, I knew ahead of time as I was going into surgery for AJ, my second child, and for the twins, I had legitimate panic attacks while they were rolling me back to the OR. And so I told my OB this, and prior to going in for Nico's birth, I was like, this usually happens to me. And she's like, that's okay. We'll put a little magic something into your IV.
Oh, awesome.
We'll get you started feeling good before surgery even starts. And I had a fantastic anesthesiologist who was right there in my ear the whole time, so encouraging. And he did make sure that took the edge off, first of all. But secondly, so my oldest is 15 years old. So much has changed in cesarean births since she and my other daughter were born. Nico was the first baby I got to hold in my arms right after he was born. Wow. Usually, like in the old days when you're having a C-section, they take the baby right away and start doing all of the things. And so his birth was fantastic. I had a fantastic OB. All of it was wonderful. But I will say, this was the hardest physical recovery. I had intense post-surgery pain like I had never experienced. Just my first night home, the pain was so bad just getting into bed. I was sobbing. My other C-sections, I had prided myself that I never took a pain pill after I left the hospital. I was just doing, ibuprofen around the clock. But I hadn't taken any of the big, serious pain pills. So I came home without having the prescription filled for pain pills, although I had the prescription. And when it was so incredibly painful just to get into my bed, Kyle was like, I'm going to go fill the pain pill prescription. I'll be right back.
Right.
Yes. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, the days and weeks following that birth physically, and I do think it probably is because, when you're in your 40s, you just don't recover as quickly. It was even harder than after I'd had twins, and that was not an easy birth either. But yeah, that took, I had to have some support getting through recovery for that I didn't have to have when I was younger.
Right. Well, that goes along with everything that happens to us with age. Even if we, sprain our ankle, it can take weeks.
You're out for 3 months.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, totally. Totally.
So you definitely think giving birth to a child might take longer.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad, though, that the birth was such a wonderful experience because I would imagine that, because this happens to us, everything changes as we get older. And so when you would see new moms say, oh, I held my baby right after birth, you said you hadn't even gotten to experience that yet, but you got to this time.
Yes. And that was such a blessing of this birth. It is, it's funny how we as moms do this. I genuinely can almost forget how bad the pain was in recovery, but I do still remember how intensely just joyful and blissful it was to get to hold Nico right after he was born.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah. Well, I know that when I had my first baby, like we all we're all clueless and we learn everything on the fly. And now, also, you've let listeners know that you've actually written a book many years ago about the first year. But I would imagine that your approach to mothering a newborn changed from your oldest to youngest.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
What kind of changes did you see?
Well, the biggest change was, of course, most of us can remember, those of us who are parents with your first baby, you're just so worried about everything.
Yeah.
And so, by the time Nico came along, and I will say having twins made me reconsider everything I believed about parenting, and especially parenting newborns, because what I eventually settled on with parenting my daughters, who are 15 and 12 now, when they were newborns, is I was a very attachment parenting parent. So it was lots of baby wearing. It was, extended breastfeeding, all of these practices that were a perfect fit for my personality, for our life at the time. By the time the twins came along, trying to figure out how to do all of that with 2 infants at once, I was just like, burn all the parenting books. Nobody knows what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah.
It made me reconsider everything. So with Nico, here I've been doing this for a while. First of all, I did have the confidence of being able to be like, you know what? It's all going to be okay. The biggest thing that we had to worry about since I did have gestational diabetes, when he was born, we did have to monitor his blood sugar pretty carefully. They wanted to see him several times during his first week to check his weight and check all of these things. So I was a little bit nervous about that. But once we got through that stretch, and there's just certain comfort of just like, it's a muscle memory, I think. It was for me. Of just like, I've done this before, I can do this. And I think the more kids you have, the more you realize, like with Daisy, I keep these for my own, just like to remind myself of how absolutely neurotic I can get about things. But like I said, she was such a bad sleeper, and I was determined to fix her sleep problems. And so I had all of these sleep journals where I would write down to the minute when she went to sleep, when she woke up, all of these things. Now having all these kids, and there's all these other things going on. Nico, we've just tucked him into our life. And, sometimes even to this day, he's almost 1. Sometimes he'll take a full nap in the carrier on my back. Sometimes he'll literally, I'll just lay him down on the floor on a pallet in our living room, and life is going on around him. He just has gotten tucked into our life so much. And it has actually been just so much more peaceful to be like, it's all going to work out. It's going to look different for every kid. That's another huge thing that I have learned, is that every human being has their own personality and their own preferences from the start.
Yes.
And I could look at each of my kids now and see how even as newborns, they were already showing us who they are as people. And so to be able to look at Nico and recognize like, okay, he's into this, he doesn't like that, I can approach that with so much more joy and curiosity instead of trying to make him conform to how I think babies are supposed to be.
Right.
Some of the big advice that I got when I had my first baby was to always ask yourself in how you're responding is, would this work with multiples? And I remember thinking, but I don't have multiples, you can't understand that. You can't comprehend that when you just have the one. And then once you've had the 3rd or 4th or 5th, you realize that you do have to consider that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can't just stay home to nap perfectly at all the schedules. You have to have them just, like you said, fit into your life.
Yeah,
Yes.
Meg, I have 5 kids also. My last 2 are twins. And I always feel like God gave me twins to basically humble me, because you can really feel like you know what you're doing as a mom. Man, 4 and 5, they did things that I said my kids would never do.
Yes. It's so true. It's so true. Yeah.
I love that. But through the humbling process, it sounds like we've all been there. It does bring peace, and you can have so much more fun because you're not so neurotic. Like, you don't have time to do the things you did with your first child. You're like, I can't imagine myself sitting and writing to the minute their sleep schedule.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I know. And that was I was newly a stay-at-home mom. I had been a teacher before that. So it was just me and her. My husband was a football coach at the time, a college football coach. So he was literally never home. All I had to do in my life, and this was before, iPhones and all of those things, although we did, of course, have the internet, but all I had to do in my life was focus on our day-to-day life, on Daisy, and especially on her sleep. yeah, that was all I had to do to keep me busy.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, did Nico nap this morning? What are we doing here?
Right. Oh my goodness. I've often said, like, if you met me with my first child, like, I wouldn't have liked myself with my first child.
Gosh.
I wouldn't have wanted to be my own friend.
Exactly.
Because I was so worked up and anxious about it. And each child just relaxes you that much more. With 4 kids separated in the middle by an age gap, I could totally understand how you'd be concerned with balancing the needs of your older kids versus your younger kids. So how has having older kids been good and maybe not so good with having a baby in the house again?
I do have to say this was one of my biggest worries.
Okay.
You always hear all of this about how difficult the transition can be. The twins were, like right at that early elementary phase. And of course, they're little boys. They need lots of attention. I have all of a sudden a teenager and a tween. They need, it's so funny because as your kids get older, they need less physical attention, but they need so much emotional attention.
Yes.
I was so worried about it, but from the very minute those older kids met Nico in the hospital to when he came home till even now, they're playing with him right now downstairs as we're recording, they absolutely adore Nico and he loves them. It's been so fun to see as he's gotten older and more cognizant of, them and their personalities and those types of things. He loves them too. And so that has been just such an unexpected blessing, how much I was unprepared for how much the kids would love him. And they absolutely do. Now, there have been times that it has been, it's kind of cramped their style. Like last summer, because we had a new baby and I was recovering from surgery and it was taking me a long time to recover, we really didn't get to do anything fun. We usually have like a pool membership at our city pool. We're usually driving to museums, going on little day trips. We didn't do any of that. And I do think, especially my 12-year-old, who's very extroverted and loves to get out of the house and loves to do things. I do think that part of it, even though she loved having a baby, just that big change to how we would normally do summer was really hard on her. And, and then there's been little things throughout the year, just things that we've had to say, no, we can't do that. We don't want to be out that late because we've got to get Nico in bed, those types of things. There have been changes that they've had to kind of roll with the punches. I feel like it has probably impacted the older girls who, are much older and have many more activities going on than it has the twins. But at the same time, I do think that they have all been so great about just kind of taking it in stride. And we've kind of tried to adjust. And if they have to miss one thing, then maybe make up with doing, something more fun another time, those types of things to try to help them make the adjustment. But yeah, it was the biggest surprise of all for me was just absolutely how much they adore him. I can remember when, back in the very earliest newborn days when I was pretty much just in bed, with my little nursing nest, they would come in first thing in the morning, especially the twins would come in very first thing in the morning. They could not wait to see Nico.
Aww.
They would want to tell him good morning. I remember John Kyle, one of my twins, just looking at him one day and just saying, he's so beautiful. And it just love it. So
yeah. That's wonderful. I think that Mindy, she has kids that are a little older than her 2 younger. Julie, you kind of have an age gap between your last 2. And I know I have 2 older and then kind of 3 younger. And that is one of the hardest things is kind of balancing those needs. But it also is so beautiful when you see your older kids really take care of your younger kids.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I know now, like I've just moved my second oldest child out of the house. And I'm so glad I have 2 left. I'm like, you guys can't grow up. It goes. I realize now how fast it goes. I'm so thankful to have these 2 boys at home still.
Yes, it does. It's such, it's so trite to say it, but it really does. It goes faster every year somehow.
Yes.
Yeah. I know when we have babies in our 20s and 30s, there's a lot of other women around us that are kind of in the same boat, so to speak. But have you found that your life maybe is a little bit out of sync with other women because they don't have newborns? And just how's that affected your mom friendships?
I will say, just to be honest, this has been a really difficult part of having a baby in my 40s is not having my actual peers also be in that baby stage. Although it does help that most of them do have kids, and so they can relate. They remember the struggle. But to not have any like age to age peers has been difficult. One thing that has been a comfort is being Catholic. Lots of families have lots of kids. And so even though these may not be my like close circle of friends, just being in an environment where I see moms that have, this whole age range of kids there with them in the pew. And, a lot of them have gray hair like I do, and they have little ones with them, and they're big kids too. Being in an environment where that's just totally normal has helped me not feel like I stick out quite so much. My very dearest friend here in Oklahoma City, we've been friends since we were in middle school, since we were in 7th grade. She's practically an aunt to Nico. She, has just been there cheering him on all along the way and just loves him so much. So, there's that sort of affection that my friends have for him, but it's a little different than when you would get together. I have nobody to get together with play dates, for play dates with, because everybody's kids are in school and nobody has little ones anymore. So that's been a big change from especially when, I was in my 20s and early 30s when my girls were little. Our lives were revolved around play dates and library playtime and all of these, very little kid stage of life activities, which I just don't really know. It's hard to find my fit now. So,
I have 3 children, and there's 6 years difference than the youngest. And I know that he just, he relates better to older people and adults today, because I think that he was just always forced into that world. We didn't just have play dates just for him as babies. He just joined along with us.
Yes.
Brothers and sisters. And he even watched things earlier that we didn't let kids watch. Like, he was just in a more grown-up world his whole life.
Absolutely.
I almost felt like with my younger kids that had older siblings, I needed to kind of apologize to other moms whose first baby might be the age of my 3rd child. I'd be like, oh, well, if he was our first, we wouldn't have already let him watch Pirates of the Caribbean. But I know he's only 2, but he really likes Jack Sparrow, because he just joined in with the older kids. Like, you know what I'm saying?
It's like they're watching Barney. And
Absolutely. Yes. I totally relate to that.
I'm sure Nico will be a more mature 1 and 2 and 3-year-old than the other ones.
We'll see. We'll see how it turns out for him.
Yeah. Well, how has Nico affected your professional goals, Meg? Because I would imagine that you had reached a certain rhythm. All your kids were in school, and you could accomplish pretty much what you wanted to during the day.
Yes, that has been a huge thing that I've had to think about and have really gone back and forth on. For a time, I really did think, well, maybe this is the time that I need to close Sorta Awesome. We've been doing this for a while, and I just don't know what my days are going to look like. But the interesting thing was, for the first 9 months of his life, basically, he was just so used to being so portable. I recorded so many episodes of Sorta Awesome with him in the baby carrier, just either napping, or if he was, he's little, they hardly make any noise, or they make those cute newborn sounds now when they discovered their voice and they want to yell and make noise all the time. It got a little bit more tricky. But yeah, I really did think, well, what is this going to do? Do I need to put everything on pause? Do I need to stop everything and just start over again at some point? Thankfully for me, having a job where work from home and had been used to working from home and making things fit into nap time rhythms and all of the things that come along with working from home, I was able to just say, you know what, let's just keep going and see what happens. And if it gets to be too stressful, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for now, let's just keep going. And like I said, he turns 1 this month, and it's been kind of crazy because with quarantine happening, my older kids have really learned how to, take care of him in terms of playing blocks with him, or whatever the thing is that to help him stay busy if he's not, he doesn't happen to be napping when I'm recording. And so we've really been able to just keep going and are planning on even expanding some of the things that we're doing with Sorta Awesome. So at first, I really did think this is going to be a huge change. But again, it's just one of those things where after you've been parenting for a while, you look for all the like little hacks and things that you can do to make it work.
Right.
I've been super inspired by, looking at women who have, professional careers, whether they're judges, attorneys, fashion designers, across different disciplines who have 4 kids or more kids. And they just, they somehow have made it work. It did make me feel like, you know what, if she's doing it, I don't see why I can't do it. And so seeing that example of other women doing it has been hugely encouraging to me.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, we've talked a lot about the birth of the new baby in this stage of life for you as a mom. I'm really curious how this has been for your husband. How is he different now with Nico than with your older kids? And has it had an impact on your marriage that you may not have expected?
That is such a great question. And, I think a lot of times people don't ask about how the dad is doing with all of the changes in family life. But that's a very real dynamic and a very real component. I will say when my older girls were born, that was when my husband was coaching college football, and he just really wasn't home very much at all. We talk about, I'm not telling stories on him or anything like that. He talks about this openly. That's the main reason that he left college coaching, because he loved that career and he was very good at it. But it's really hard on family life. He just wasn't there. I did a lot of solo parenting. So then when the twins were born, he was home a lot more. We had moved to Oklahoma City. He had changed careers by then. He's in the financial services industry. When the twins were born, he worked here in Oklahoma City, he was like 7 minutes away from the house. So that, he was a lot more hands-on when the twins were born. So that was a big change for us. And now he works from home. Now he co-owns a financial services boutique firm with a partner, and he works from home. And so he's here all the time. So it has been, it has been a complete 180 from when our oldest girls were born. And I will say he's definitely different. He's super hands-on. He would take Nico, especially when he was a newborn, he would take Nico when I was just too tired, especially at night, and he would rock him to sleep. The other night, Nico was having a meltdown, and I was just over it. And he took him out on the front porch and rocked him in a rocking chair on the front porch until he got under control. I think that he, as a dad, is so much more confident too. And so that makes a huge difference just when you feel like, okay, they're not going to break. I can pick them up. I can play with them. In fact, my husband's super perceptive. A lot of times he has the idea of like what's going on with Nico if he's upset or fussy before I do. Like if he's having a particularly fussy day and just cannot stay down for a nap, he's like, you think he might be getting teeth in? Let's do some Motrin. He's just really tuned in to what all is going on with Nico. So in terms of having an impact on our marriage, I do think that in a lot of ways, I think that my pregnancy with Nico brought us closer together. Kyle, just being here and being home, Kyle does almost all of the dinner cooking for us. And so he totally adapted which is super nice. He loves to cook.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He loves to cook, and he's a great cook. And so when I had gestational diabetes, he totally revamped how we were eating and totally supported me in that. It has been, I would say, all in all, it has been a positive for our marriage. I mean, that's not to say that there hasn't been stress and strain at times, especially when neither of us are sleeping well. Nico is still in our room. We haven't quite figured out how and when to move him in with the big boys. And so, the loss of sleep can wear on anybody after a while. But all in all, I would say that it's been surprisingly positive for us. So, yeah.
I love hearing that.
Yeah. Well, Meg, this has been so interesting, and we appreciate all you've shared today. Are there any other things that you'd like to share? What would you like to let other women know in this situation?
That is such a good question. And I will say that when I did release that podcast episode on Sorta Awesome, how I told my sister I'm pregnant, I asked for our awesomes to share with me any encouraging stories they had of women, if they themselves had babies in their 40s or someone in their family did, maybe their mom did. And I was flooded with so much encouragement from people saying, either that I did have a baby, all of my kids were born in my 40s, or my last one was, or my mom was, still having babies in her 40s. And so I was one of those later in life babies, just so much encouragement. And that has really come full circle, because now I have women regularly, I'd say once or twice a month, I have women either DM me on Instagram or reach out in the Hangout group for that's our podcast community on Facebook to say, surprise, I'm pregnant. I'm in my 40s. I'm freaking out. What's going to happen? And so it has been such a wonderful feeling to be able to kind of return the favor of how so many people gathered around and encouraged me when I was freaking out.
Right.
To be like, you know what? It's not just gonna be okay. It is gonna be awesome. It's gonna be so great. You can't even know what joy you have in store for you, because there's just something about being able to go into parenting a new baby with confidence, with just feeling like, okay, we can do this. This is gonna be fun. Enjoying it instead of stressing so much.
Yeah.
So
that must be really fun for you to get to share with them what it's like on the other side.
Absolutely. It really is.
And can you believe you're coming up on Nico being a year? I mean, that's really a milestone.
It really is. This has been such a weird first year, of course, with quarantine. It feels like time has gotten so like
right.
It's very
what
distorted.
even is time anymore? It is. Right. Because right after quarantine started is when I took him for his 9-month well baby check, and now I'm going to be taking him in for his 1 year. And I'm like, weren't we just here? What's happening? So,
right.
But yeah, I cannot believe a whole year has gone by. But at the same time, now we just look at each other and like, how did we ever think we were a family without him? Like he just is so perfectly meant to be here. So,
well, I know that this episode is going to be so encouraging to all those moms who may find themselves, expecting in their 40s. And also, I just think it's just such a wonderful example of sometimes the things that are unexpected are our greatest blessings. So
absolutely.
How fun.
I love that.
Yeah. All right, let's move into our I'm a Fan segment. Meg, what are you a fan of this week?
Okay, well, this is sort of my job. I'm always trying to find what's awesome in life.
Yes.
What am I a fan of? So I have to tell you, I am a new and recent fan to a podcast called Noble Blood. Have you all heard of this one?
No, I have not.
I haven't.
Okay, so Noble Blood is a podcast that tells the stories of royalty that you don't always hear. And I am not a person, I'm not like royal family obsessed. I don't really follow the news of like the British royal family or certainly any of the other royals around the world. So when this was recommended to me by several people, I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'll give it a try. Oh my gosh, I was obsessed from the beginning because, first of all, the host of the podcast is an author named Dana Schwartz, and she has an amazing voice, and she's fantastic at storytelling. And so I was in from the beginning, but she really has done a fantastic job of finding these stories of everyone from like Marie Antoinette and her final days, which was a lot more brutal and harrowing than I ever would have guessed, to, like the Russian royal family as they were, as the Bolshevik Revolution was taking over, to the last of the royalty on the island of Hawaii. I mean, just all of these stories that I'm not like a big history buff, but the way that Dana Schwartz tells these stories is addictive. So I have found myself, I started at the beginning and I have just been going like episode after episode as I'm cleaning house or doing dishes. And it has been so fun. So I am definitely a big fan of the podcast Noble Blood.
I can't wait to listen because I do love history, but history's always better when it's personal stories.
Yes. Oh, that's exactly what this is for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. I was just thinking to myself, I know what Julie will be doing after we're done recording. Exactly. She'll be looking up that podcast.
I know.
That's wonderful. Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
I am a huge fan of, you're going to be shocked, ladies, Costco. I was going to do some big potted planters on my back deck. And I was going to, buy the planter, buy the dirt, buy the different flowers and like greenery to go in them. And I happened to be at Costco, and here's these large, bright yellow planters. We all know yellow is my favorite color. It's so happy. And there's these bright yellow planters with like 5 to 8 varieties of greenery and flowers mixed in for $30.
Oh, wow.
Okay, you cannot buy the planter itself for $30.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome.
Let alone already planted with dirt. I told my daughter, go get another basket. We are stocking up. And because I know that even once the flowers die, I'm bringing those bright yellow planters inside.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a huge fan of the Costco potted plants. I'm so thankful because it just, every time I look out on my back deck, I'm just so happy.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'll have to check out their plants. They do make it easy a lot of times to have something that looked like you put a lot of time into it.
Exactly. And so cheap for what it is.
Yes. Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
Well, mine is not nearly so exciting. It's called the ChomChom roller pet hair remover.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
And
Oh,
I'm
yes.
excited about it because we have a dog and 2 cats.
Mhm.
And I find that they like to sit on the nicest furniture, the ones that I don't want them on. And they have white background. So when I look, there's just this black mat of hair. And, if you've used those like sticky kinds, they just don't pick up very much hair. So this is a rollover that's reusable. And these brushes kind of sweep the hair up into this container that you can empty. And
Oh,
I wish
perfect.
pet hair was recyclable because I could be making a lot of stuff from this pet hair. But I'm a fan. It works great. And it's a big problem in my house.
Yes. Well, I would imagine that a lot of people struggle with that. You said it's called the ChomChom Pet Roller.
ChomChom roller pet hair remover. Yes.
Okay.
You can get it on Amazon. I think I got it at a pet store, but they do sell them on Amazon.
Well, we'll definitely put a link to that in our show notes. I am a fan of something that, Meg, I actually see on Instagram that you follow too, but I have been watching these. They're really addictive. So there's an Instagram account called Everyday Mamas, and they, in their Insta stories, have been showcasing different home tours that people send in. Just home tours around their regular houses. I am loving it. I mean, you can see all different kinds of homes all around the country.
Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds fun. We all love that.
Yeah. Have you watched any of
Yeah.
those, Meg?
I haven't yet, but it's one of those that I've seen go by in my feed and I'm like, I need to get to that. And then I just haven't yet. So I'm going to go tune in for sure.
Well, it's like if I'm eating lunch and I just don't want to quite get up yet, well, maybe I'll watch a home tour before I go on to my next activity.
Totally. Yes.
It's called Everyday Mamas. So you can get on and see what the inside of other people's houses look like, which is one of my favorite activities.
Hey, I love that.
Totally. So fun. So fun.
Yes. All right. Well, Meg, why don't you remind everybody where they can find you again?
Okay, sure. Well, you can find our podcast where all the podcasts can be found in your favorite podcast app, on Spotify, Pandora, all of the places. You can go to our website, which is sortaawesomeshow.com, and find out all of the information about our show. If you just want to check out me on social media, you can find me at Sorta Awesome Meg on Instagram. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/sortaawesome.
And definitely check out Sorta Awesome. I know you guys would have a great time listening to it. And the Facebook group Sorta Awesome Hangout. I learn something new every day.
For sure. Yes, it is. Everybody does say it's the best place on the internet, and it really is. We have over 5,000 women who are, they're just committed to being super helpful, very awesome people for all kinds of things. So we would love to have you guys there for sure.
Yes. And listeners, if you want to find us on Instagram, it's Midlife Matters Podcast. On Facebook, Midlife Matters Podcast. If you want to email us, it's midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. For those of you, some people have a little trouble finding our show notes. If you want to get our show notes right in your email box, just email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. Write show notes in the subject line, and we'll send you out a weekly email where you can play it from there and also find all the links. Meg, thanks so much for joining us today. I love this topic. I know it's going to be a fun one and so encouraging for listeners. And we loved hearing about Nico. Happy birthday to Nico.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Loved having you, Meg.
Yes.
Thank you guys
so
for having
much
me.
for
This was
talking
a
with us.
treat.
All right. We'll talk to you guys next week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.